Hello everyone. Before I start my talk, I would like to thank Vince Kelly and Jamie Kroll for providing me the opportunity to speak at 2014 Evolution of the Athlete conference among much better and more recognizable experts. I also want to thank the listeners out there for attending the conference and trusting us and me to deliver quality information. I hope to live up to your expectation, guys. I feel very sorry for not being able to deliver this webinar live due to my very recent relocation to Doha, Qatar, to work in football performance and science department with Aspire Academy. I will be happy to answer any questions from the listeners if you send them to my email or Twitter. Okay, so let's start. I need to be honest with you here. I do not have it all sorted out. A lot of things still bugs me, especially their implementation in real life with real athletes, taking into account real life constraints and juggling with real life confounders. There are probably some inconsistencies in my reasoning, and if you identify those, please let me and others know. What I would like to offer in this presentation is a theoretical framework and a better way to think about the problems. Hopefully, if Einstein was right, then we cannot solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. Then this new way of thinking might be a step forward solving individualization issues in real life. Not to leave you empty-handed, I will share a couple of working solutions that do have flaws, as you will soon see, which you can apply in your training with your athletes and provide overview of a couple of tools I use. Not perfect, but workable solution at the moment. To make things much clearer, I will start with an analogy. Imagine you have two race cars, red and white. Each of these two cars have different characteristics. Red car is great at steering and have great brakes and tires, but lousy engine power and hence lousy acceleration and lousy top speed. White car has a great engine power, hence very good acceleration and top speed, but lousy brakes. So let's put these babies on the racetrack and do the time trial. But before, we need to impose one assumption and one constraint. Assumption is that the skill levels of the drivers are not important and are equal. In other words, drivers are able to fully utilize each car's potential. Next constraint is that the cars do the time trial alone. This is also assumptions, that there are no interactions between them. Well, how do they compete? How do they compare? Who will win? Well, it depends on a particular course, right? On certain courses, red car will dominate, while on other, white car will dominate. Depends on the number of straight parts and curves and their organization in the particular course. Hence, the actual expression of strength and weaknesses depends on the course, or in other words, course needs. Okay, let's imagine that this particular course played on each car's strength and weaknesses equally, e.g., red car loses his time on straight parts, but managed to catch up in the curves, and vice versa for the white car. So they end up having the same time. Without going into what would happen if we repeat the race and concept of typical variability, which is indeed a very important concept for another talk, how can we judge the strength and weaknesses, or from now on performance limiters or limiting factors of the cars in this particular race? What can we do to identify limiters in these two cars? The simplest solution is to set up timing gates and see where each car loses the time. This is the cheapest solution that can be very good proxy to the limiters. The next solution might be to use specialized tracks that constrain the behavior and hence leads to the expression of the car characteristics. This could be straight line speed tests, cone polygons, and braking distance tests. The third and most expensive option will be specialized diagnostics that can go more into the details of the engine, brakes, and aerodynamical performance of the car. Hopefully, you notice this scaling effect, going from gross to detail analysis, from cheaper and quicker to more expensive and longer. It is important to notice that the first method gives us the hint on where could the limiter be. Second method gives us the idea what those limiters are, and third method gives us the why answer. For example, our straight track show that max speed is limited, but without more diagnostical testing, we don't know what is causing it and why. It could be the drag or air resistance. It could be the problems with the engine, and even the fear of the driver to drive that fast. I know we assume that the driver is not an issue, but that was just for the sake of an example. Driver skills to use the car potential is huge issue and can be huge limiting factor. We can always find limiters of the limiters. The question is how much deep down the rabbit hole we need to go. Suppose our two cars are racing in the city. Now the skill of the driver to find the best route and avoid traffic jams might be much more important than the car characteristics. We can see again that context matters, or in this case, race needs guides the expression of the limiters. We can improve car characteristics, but it might not improve the performance as much as improving the cognitive skills of the driver. This cognitive aspect is usually forgotten, and there are things such as focus, concentration fatigue, and cognitive load and such that we usually never consider. So what does fractals have to do with this? Well, for the race car driving in a city race all the time, knowing car limiters doesn't involve going deep in the rabbit hole. But for a race car driving all the time in the real races, one needs to get much deeper to find and evaluate limiters. This is pretty evident in sport. When we talk generalists versus specialists. For example, if explosive power is a performance limiter for a football player, one might prescribe doing Olympic lifting and making it simple. But for an Olympic lifter, improving Olympic lifts can involve a lot more details than the mentioned football player, like speed of the force shutdown, catch, rhythm, and so forth. When it comes to improving aerobic power as a limiter, average team sport athlete can do 1500-meter time trial to assess the state, which will be more than enough information for him or his coach to evaluate potential limiter. But for a miler, one needs to dig much more and try to find limiters here, like race pace, final sprint, type of muscle fibers, and so forth. When it comes to testing for neuromuscular fatigue, using counter movement jump, one needs to realize that how athletes reach certain outcome, in this case height, might be more important and more sensitive. But for that we need more specialized equipment. What are we trying to do here is to create a model of training and performance using racing car analogy. It is not perfect, but it is usable analogy. I have also started to add levels of complexity to this model, starting from simple race to limiting factors to importance of the level of the skill of the driver. Now it is important to consider interactions with other cars and add fatigue into the equation. Let's suppose that during the race or time trial, car fatigues or get tired or basically slows down. Let's say that this is a protective mechanism to avoid overheating of the engine and ultimate breakdown of the car. The faster the car goes and for longer, the more heat is being accumulated in the engine and slower the speed and reduce the speed down the race or time trial. So in these simple constraints with no interactions, in the case of time trial, we are pretty certain that it is fatigue that causes slowdown. And with further evaluation, we know it is the cooling mechanism actually that limits the performance in this particular case. So let's assume I have borrowed the car to drive in the city. One day I go from my apartment to work through downtown and it takes me 15 minutes. No car heating nor fatigue since I'm driving, within speed limits. Another day I go to do the same, but I wake up 15 minutes later. I managed to get into a traffic jam because everyone is heading to work, basically pretty much at the same time. Hopefully you notice this effect in your own city. This time it takes me 30 minutes, especially in the last part when I turn out from the highway. The question is the car tired? Is the car fatigued? We have similar analysis in time motion in soccer, where players cover less distance and high-speed distance in the last 15 minutes of the game. We automatically declare that athletes are tired, so they are running less. Without more precise measurement, we can't actually know the reason because we don't take context into equation, and context might be that the ball is out of play more often or the team is purposely slowing down the game. So without more information, we cannot assume that. Similarly, we cannot assume that the faster car will be faster in the city. It depends on the context. Now that we have identified limiting factors or bottlenecks under certain context, how should we approach in their removal or improving them? Let's imagine cars can adapt to imposed demands similar to humans, along with wear and tear under the same. How should we approach the removal of the limiters? The most common approach is the assumption that spending more time pounding, in this case the outcome measures, one will improve the limiters. Or that training at certain intensity zones or intensity zone can stress certain limiters, and that will cause those limiters to adapt. For example, those two cars can drive multiple time trial in that 3.5 time and hope they will improve. Another example is when we identify engine power as the limiter in the red car and we start doing straight line accelerations in hope that engine power will improve. These two strategies might work or might not. What we miss is an empiricist approach where we measure effects of our strategies, basically how one reacts and act accordingly. Using repeated time trial might work in a case when the driver is not so skilled with the vehicle and learns from race to race how to best use the car or car characteristics. If the driver is skillful and familiar with the race, then that kind of complex / shotgun approach will not provide enough of overload for certain limiters. Second example, with straight line accelerations might work assuming that the skill of the driver is not the issue and that maybe some other limiters, let's say also are not limiting engine power expression, like bad aerodynamics, heavy car, and so forth. We tend to see this assumption in practice all the time. If one wants to improve VO2 max, one run VO2 max intervals. If one wants to improve lactate threshold, one run at lactate threshold. If one wants to improve maximal strength, one works with 90% plus 1 RM zones. But we now know that this might not be the case. First, we need to be certain that the limiters. First we need to be certain what the real limiters are, and then avoiding assuming that training at intensities that aggravate those limiters will automatically lead to their adaptation. There is also an element of the scale here. The higher the performance, the deeper down the rabbit hole one needs to go for marginal gains. There is also an aspect of practicality. Compare again soccer player who wants to improve his aerobic power and miler who wants to improve his 1500-meter time. For a soccer player, it might be enough to just repeat 1500-meter intervals at that particular speed, while the miler would need to dig much deeper into the potential limiters and adaptations being sought. Soccer players cannot expect his performance to increase simply by playing soccer. So this is quite similar. Certain elements need to be, isolated and loaded to improve the limiters. So what are we doing wrong in the sport training? We make a lot of assumptions, some of which are evident in race car analogy. We are focused on making every test sport-specific, whatever that means. Not to say that these are useless, au contraire, they have a purpose, but from a diagnostic perspective or identifying performance limiters, they might be too complex. So they depends on a lot of factors. Hence, we are unsure what is the limiter and how to approach its removal. I will come back to this later when I discuss HIT training. We assume that the driver is always fully using car potential. This is also a limiter. We assume limiters are absolute, but are rather relative to the task and context at hand. We assume same scaling for every type of athlete, level and type of performance and context. We forgot cognitive aspects and are very biased toward physical aspects of training and load monitoring. Just remember driving in a city example. In team sports, we have both individual and team limiters that needs to be addressed, and they fight for the training time and training resources. We assume that individualization is prescribing training based on outcome measures, in this case race pace, maximum aerobic speed, or percentage of 1RM. It is definitely a step forward, but it's not the complete individualization. We assume training zones corresponding to certain limiters and assume that hitting those zones improve limiters. We assume that there is the best structure to training and training progression. We basically make a lot of assumptions. What we lack is data-driven approach. We tend to think that feed-forward approach is enough. What we need is something that Derek Everly calls reverse periodization and Mel Siff calls cybernetic periodization. I know this sounds fuzzy, but it's so simple. We need a reliable data and observations to continuously reassess and reevaluate our training decisions. That's it. We need both top-down and bottom-up approach. I also highly recommend checking John Keeley's article on this model, actually. Now, this is a great theoretical model, but very hard to implement in real world. We need to sneak data collection and avoid loading training with testing and so forth. Luckily, with the modern technology, some of it's getting easier, and we can collect data without information overload. When it comes to team sports, individualization needs to take into consideration that what has to be done on a team level and work around that. We also need to keep in mind simplicity and productivity versus perfectionism. And this is the thing I will come back to later. Here is the conceptual model of such an interaction that can guide training interventions. Here we have team training practice and game practices that are more constrained, structured, and less flexible to adapt to individualization. Not impossible, but kind of just less flexible. We also have individual training and individual recovery components that contribute to total training load together with team practices and games, compared to which these two are less constrained and more flexible for individualization. There are a couple of important questions that need to be answered here. First one is how much training load is generated for team practices and games, and are these appropriate to induce adaptations in the limiters, be those technical, tactical, physical, or psychological. Next crucial question is how much more oil we need to put on the fire, or in other words, what kind of individual training and how much we need to complement. Sometimes we need to remove actually, rather than to add, for the individual player to create optimal load and hence adaptations. Sometimes we need to prescribe general non-weight bearing training to avoid the chronic load of the players. That's why it's important that not all practices should be sport specific. Third crucial question is, will the team practices and games benefit from those adaptations and training loads? Is training load too big, and will practices and games suffer? So please make sure that potential adaptation and limiters removal also includes injuries and illness. The point is that individual training and individualization should be put into context. But to do that, we need to collect the data. Certain coaches believe that to be able to play, one needs to be fit, while others believe that to be fit, one needs to play. In machine learning, there is a saying that there is no free lunch, which basically means this depends from case to case, and there is not a single model that suits everyone. Another thing that is important mentioning is that the load of training and hence training effect is relative to the current readiness or state, or in other words, this modulates training load and load experiences and adaptation seen. Hence, knowing the current readiness through reliable tools might help with the appropriate placement of the most potential stimuli. This might be a bit harder in team sports, but please note that this is just a theoretical model. Now we have finally covered theoretical ramblings. Let's make this more practical. But first I need to be honest again. Using what has been set up till now provides great guiding theoretical overview of what has to be done and why. What we lack is the practical how. As I have said, this is still work in progress, and the solutions probably depend on the context at hand. Some things might never be optimal due team training constraints, but on the flip side, taking the concept of anti-fragility, maybe they shouldn't be optimal. But this is a topic for some other time. My general idea is that conditioning, especially running base, which I will cover here, should complement team practices and special conditioning drills like small-sided games. But without measuring load of both components, we are never certain how are we complementing and is it optimal. Long story short, if team practices are easy and cover a lot of running and low to medium intensities, then general conditioning should cover high intensity, and vice versa. We just need some data to back this up. Assuming that players need to improve their aerobic power, which is the limiter, and they need to supplement team practices with general running-based conditioning, what is the best way to evaluate their current condition? What can be used as a diagnostic tool rather than just outcome or the benchmark? A lot of teams now use yo-yo beep test. Yo-yo test is great as a benchmark, but cannot provide meaningful information regarding what should be done and how. You basically get distance covered and stage velocity, but unfortunately you cannot use it to prescribe training. So it only serves to describe training. Taking fractal dimensions we spoke before into account, one doesn't know what causes limits performance outcome in the yo-yo test. Is it aerobic engine, change of direction mechanics, better intraset recovery, higher anaerobic reserve, or so forth? We don't know it. What we need is a test or tests that doesn't burden the team to do a lot of testing, yet provide meaningful, actionable, prescriptive advice. There are numerous methods like that, and let's cover some of them and their pros and cons. So here we have different tests that are pretty common to be pretty frequently used in practices. I group them together and I will cover some of the pros and cons of each. So the most simplest are time trials. We usually do a 1200 or to 1500 meter time trial, which is the simplest and shortest, but there are problems with it. So we have problems with the pacing strategy, especially with the players who are not familiar with running continuously straight ahead for 5 to 6 minutes, so they might end up being starting up too fast and then dying out, or actually starting very very conservative and not being able to fully run the best time. In this case, we also don't have a change of direction, and we don't have any intermittency with efforts. One way to improve this is to prescribe actually 5 to 6 minutes time trials in a shuttle arrangement. But before that, instead of prescribing 12 to 1500 meter, instead of prescribing actually a distance, we can prescribe time. This might be even worse for the players because this might be more precise, but when you run for time, it's even harder to pace than when you run for distance. When you see the end goal, and that's a distance, you are more able to pace better than you have 1 minute left. You kind of it's a vague thing, especially if you're not used to do it. One way to improve it is to either do one of these, either prescribing a set distance or set time. And for set time, you need special equipment like GPS or counting shuttles. Yeah, and one way to improve when it comes to change of direction and add that component in is to do these two in a shuttle arrangement, and that could range from 20 meters to 40 meters. Next, we have beep tests, which have pre-record beeps intervals. One eval is I think it's improved version of University of Montreal track test beep test. So it's run on a straight line on an athletic track, and you start around 8 or 10 kilometers an hour, and every 2 minutes you increase the velocity for 1 kilometer an hour until you basically are unable to hit the cones on a specific pace. So pros are there are no pacing issues in this case, and the cons are basically longer duration and administration. So you need to be much more organized. There's also no intermittency and no speed correction, which I will cover just now. Another way to do is to do a beep test not on a straight line or around the track, is to actually do it in a shuttle. So it's called shuttle beep test. That's quite popular, and actually it's maybe one of my favorites because it does have some change of directions. It's usually done on I think 20 meters distance. But there's one problem, because if you compare velocities reached in a same test done in a shuttles, probably we'll see a huge drop in velocity reached. For example, if on a straight line your VAM eval, or in this case mass, is 18 kilometers an hour, doing it in a shuttles will probably be 15 to 16. And that happens because there's no speed correction. So every time you change direction, you lose around, depending on the surface or body weight and actually a change of direction efficiency, you lose around 0.7 seconds. So what most tests do, including yo-yo test and including some shuttle test, is they don't correct for change of direction. So if you need to run 20 meters at specific velocity, they just divide it and get the time for the beeps. They don't take into account 0.7 or more to actually change the direction. So that's why you get huge difference between doing beep test on a straight line and doing beep test in a shuttles. Using the same velocities and same actual protocol. Third is critical velocity and D prime. Critical velocity is very interesting concept. It's basically the highest velocity one can sustain for a prolonged period of time, and it's pretty similar to, although a bit higher than lactate threshold. And D prime is anaerobic reserve. These tests are the most, in my opinion, the most diagnostical, because you know exactly did someone reach certain outcome because he has a higher critical velocity or because he has more anaerobic reserve. Unfortunately, it takes minimum 3 tests, 3-time trials to actually evaluate these or mathematically get those two parameters. There's also, again, because we're doing time trials, they share same cons, you know, like pacing and no change of directions and no intermittency. There's a new improved way to do this quicker, and involves 3-minute all-out run. The author is Professor Petit, if I pronounce it correctly. And you need to have instantaneous velocity, and you know, you need to use GPS for this one. Not so sure. I think he provided reliability studies for it and showed it, you know, to be quite reliable and valid compared to the, you know, normal critical velocity tests. But not so sure how much can be done in team settings, especially not that often, because it involves actually 3-minute, you know, all around run, and we might have a lot of pacing issues and all that stuff. So it's, you know, it's very interesting, very great potential solution because it's very short. But I guess, you know, you need to have players who are familiarized with it. The last test which we used quite often, and it's probably also my favorite or second favorite test, is Martin Boucher 3015 intermittent field test. It's similar to, it's actually a form of beep test, but you know, as opposed to a yo-yo test, you run for a certain period of time. In this case, you run for 30 seconds and rest for 15 seconds in between cones that are you know, originally set for 40 meters, but you also have a 28 meter version. So it is the most complete test. It has CODs, change of directions, and, you know, intermittency. But the problems are it lasts long. It takes maybe 20 minutes to, if you're very fast. It takes around 20 minutes to finish, and it's not really diagnostical because you don't know if someone reached better score because of, you know, better change of direction abilities, because he recovers quicker in those 15 seconds rest, or, you know, because he has, I don't know, higher maximum aerobic speed, or because he has more, you know, anaerobic reserve, and so forth. Also, I've noticed that because every stage is actually a smallest worth file change, you need to be strict with the protocol, and, you know, and one small error can cause, you know, smallest worth file change in the test. So I would prefer certain tests that has more repeats at a certain velocity, just to avoid this, you know, error making. Although Martin Boucher showed it's, you know, quite reliable, at least reliable as is yo-yo test. Hopefully you notice this trade-off problem. Knowing the achieved velocity of these tests is one thing, and improving that velocity is something different. We tend to assume that they are the same, that running at that particular velocity will improve the velocity itself. This might be the case, but also might be completely wrong. We need to update our plans based on reaction of the players, and we also need to remember that those fractal dimensions, where this approach might be more than enough for an average team sport player, but not enough for someone like high-level distance runner. Our current models of HIT conditioning are biased toward improving VO2 max. by spending time at VO2 max itself. So if one spends more time at VO2 max, then VO2 max will improve, or velocity associated with it will. Unfortunately, things are not that simple. Assuming that the time spent at VO2 max is the stimuli for adaptation, and using HR, heart rate, as a proxy to it, we need to make sure that when athletes are doing HIT conditioning, their heart rate reaction is similar. But that might not be the case for all methods, especially if you utilize straight line tests with intermittent shuttle conditioning and vice versa. Martin Boucher coined the term training specific. So depending on the type of training one plans doing, he or she chooses the appropriate or the best test. You can see from the picture that using velocities of linear beep test, in this case running at 110% for doing 15-15, running at 50 seconds and resting 50 seconds, creates much more variability in heart rate when using than when we use 30-15 intermittent field test as a reference point. So each line is athlete, and this is the same training, but in this case we use Leger Boucher beep test, and in this case we use Martin Boucher 30-15 test. As you can see, all three guys here are running at the same relative intensity, but we see huge differences in the reaction. This guy is even quit, so he quit from running, and this case, this test might be great for linear conditioning or straight line conditioning, and tests like Martin 30-15 test might be better for similar conditioning. In this case, 15-15 intermittent tests. As you can see, athletes showed pretty much same reaction. So again, we have a trade-off between sport or training specific and more diagnostic tests. One solution might be, especially for supramax intervals, to use an aerobic reserve or ANR, which is nothing more than the difference between maximum aerobic speed and maximum sprinting speed. These are all the pictures from a great paper by Martin Boucher, which I highly recommend. So this can make acute reactions more homogeneous, so or less variable, although I don't have a proof of it. So instead of prescribing 110% of maximum aerobic speed, as in this case, one can prescribe using a percentage of anaerobic reserve, especially for a supra-maximum test like maximum aerobic speed plus 15% of anaerobic reserve. Unfortunately, there's no best method to implement here. It depends on what one wants, what type of training will follow, who is she working with, and so forth. At the moment, I will tend to prefer simple velocity, corrected shuttle mode beep test, and estimation of maximum sprinting speed. So that could be 40-meter sprint with a difference between 30 and 40. So I would prefer this method because it gives certain balance between diagnostic and practicality. So we get the best reaction when we use it as a training specific test. There are basically a couple of groups of methods in HIT conditioning. For the best overview, I highly suggest checking mentioned excellent two-part article by Martin Boucher, High Intensity Interval Training, Solutions to the Training Puzzle. Speaking about HIT only, we differentiate between long intervals, which are over 60 seconds, short intervals, which are shorter than 60 seconds, sprint interval training around 15 to 45 seconds, with complete or semi-complete recovery, and repeated sprints, which are short duration and very short recovery. I have created a freely available Excel template with numerous examples of each method on my blog. Besides, Martin paper provides currently the best overview of the methods used in HIT conditioning, and I highly recommend checking that out. So how do we use how to use associated speed to create the individualized HIT condition for the team. We split them to groups of similar velocity. Similar is also a tricky term, so it's a difference between groups. Should either be typical variation or smallest formula change, or we just find a difference based on a number of groups of the athletes we can serve at one instance. One of the simplest solutions are shuttles, where we calculate the distance based on maximum aerobic speed and number of change of directions, which we use to correct the time. Or in other words, we deduct 0.7 to 1 second per turn, which basically shortens the distance compared to straight line. For example, running 15 seconds at 15 kilometers an hour, one can run 67 meters straight, but when running down and back, it is not just simply dividing 67 by 2, which is equal to 33.5, but it is actually, rather 32 meters. This is because we are actually running 15 minus 0.7 or 14.3 seconds. So this is very important correction. We can use it also when correcting for running on the rain or running on the mud, so we can increase the COD corrections. All of these are implemented in the mentioned Excel workbook that's freely available on my blog, and you can just plug the distances and times and COD correction, and you get the needed distance for a given maximum aerobic speed. When it comes to longer intervals, one might prescribe same distance that should be covered in different time, depending on the maximum aerobic speed of the group. This is not perfect because slower guys will work longer at similar relative velocity. Hence, the use of time rather than distance is preferred. These drills could be put before, after, or intermittently with more specific conditioning like small-sided games, depending on the goal of the session. It is important to make groups staggered to avoid something that I call synchronization between them, which can happen when they run side by side. You can have probably noticed that using maximum aerobic speed, we only create relative intensity of the run. The volume is still prescribed and it's not individualized. So even if the athletes run at the relative intensity, we still have different reactions to training. That is why I say that it's just a step forward to the real individualization that should at least theoretically involve also individualization of methods needed, modalities, volume, and so forth, even based on even use the current readiness actually. This might be possible in team sports, hence using relative intensity represent realistic implementation of the individualization at the moment. This covers some of the individualization of HIT conditioning. As I said, I highly suggest checking articles by Maite Mouchet and Dan Baker for more info, as well as the free tables on my website. So let's talk about strength training now. When I was starting to work as a strength conditioning coach, I believed in the saying that, teach a man how to fish. I wanted my athletes, in this case pro soccer players, to learn how to select the weights themselves by understanding the basic concepts of progression and keeping a log. I asked for them to bring a small notebook and a pen to the gym. Long story short, this failed miserably. Next phase was me keeping a log for them. I had a binder of programs for each athlete, and I was turning pages and writing sets for every guy. Unfortunately, I was unable to coach since my head was down into the papers. Again, long story short, this failed miserably. Fast forward a couple of years, I decided to prescribe exact weights and reps for every player on either a team sheet or 3 to 4 weeks individual sheet. I've used traditional person-based training approach and prescribed intensity based on each individual 1RM. Productivity jumped up. So it's amazing how productivity jumped up. Players were less playing around and I was actually able to coach. I basically exchanged a little bit of individuality for more productivity, and hence more bang for the buck with this group and within this culture. And those are soccer players. So similar to HIT conditioning, in strength training, we believe that using relative load in terms of percentage of 1 RM is all there is in individualization. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. Sometimes this is all that is needed with some athletes and pretty much useless with others. We can have athletes that should do 60% for 10 to get the most improvements in 1 RM, while others need to do like 5 sets of 1 at 95% of 1 RM to improve. So without feedback, we are just assuming and guessing. But sometimes, especially in team settings, we cannot give every player a special program, from practical standpoints. So anyway, I am a believer in percent-based approach, especially with the average team sport player. Okay, so let's cover some tweaks we can do to make percent-based approach more individualized. The general process with the percent-based approach is the following. We test or estimate 1 RM of the player. Then we prescribe training based on that number. And then we retest and rinse and repeat. So that's pretty much simple. So let's deal with each of these phases. When it comes to phase 1, we want to have some number we can use to prescribe relative intensity, and and then we use that percentage and to prescribe actual absolute loads on the barbell. So when you're dealing with a complete beginner, we skip this phase of testing and use progressive increase in weight on the bar until decent technique is established and is stable enough to implement 1 RM testing. It's just pointless to test a beginner in 1 RM even if you use percentage-based training. This can also be the case in experienced athlete coming back from a longer layoff and needs periods of retraining. In this case, one can use adjusted 1 RMs from previous periods, or if unknown, one can use athlete's body weight to establish 1 RMs until real testing can be performed. For example, one can use 70 to 100% for a bench press and 100 to 120% for squat if you're pretty sure that a given athlete is technically trained and are coming from a layoff and you don't know his 1 RM. So you still want to prescribe percent-based training, but you don't wanna do the 1 RM test that early in the season or preseason in this case. So it's important to know that 1 RM shouldn't be estimated solely by 1 RM testing. Also, one can use reps to technical failure and use a conversion tables. Here is actually one table from Dan Baker. So instead of just going to do 1 RM, one can use 3 RM, 5 RM, and estimate 1 RM from this table. And these tables are not perfect, and they depends on the age, gender, level of the lifter, and anecdotally on fast twitch to slow twitch ratio, exercises, and exercise execution. So they might differ. If you do squats, they might differ between like doing squats with the pauses and doing squats without the pause. That's why it's important to allow for some wiggle room in the actual prescribing training. So once you have 1 RMs for main exercises such as squat and bench, one needs to estimate 1 RMs for all assistant exercises. And yeah, Dan Baker has provided a neat table that is available on his website. Same as with 1 RM tables, these have much error inside. Thus, some coaches still prefer to avoid prescribing exact percentages and loads for assistant exercises and just leave only goal reps and allow athletes to self-select the weights. This also might provide a feeling of control and empowerment with the athletes. So once the main exercises are covered the way coach actually wants, with the weights the coach prescribes, athletes might choose the weights for assistant exercises and in some programs even the exercises themselves, as long as they are under a certain category. It is basically a balancing act between strict prescription and individual freedom. When it comes to prescribing training in this framework, one can prescribe exact weights and reps, or allow for some wiggle room, do the error of the formulas themselves, and most importantly, do the day-to-day variability in readiness. This can be achieved using intensity zones or rep zones. And these can vary depending on the culture within the team, coach philosophy, or phase of strength training. One thing coach can do is also prescribe time limits. Since we are working with the group, sometimes multiple groups with staggered starting time, being strict on the schedule, is paramount organizational importance. In the case you didn't notice, most of the time it is a struggle between logistics and biology. And logistics set up fixed constraints under which we can manipulate training to suit biological principles and provide individualization. For example, coach can prescribe 20 minutes to perform 6 sets of cleans, or also allow for some wiggle room here and say 20 minutes to perform minimum 5 working sets or so forth. This takes into account for day-to-day variability in readiness, especially how long it takes to recover between sets and how much volume a given athlete can take on a given day. In my experience, most athletes can hit a good set or two on a particular day, but ability to multiple sets and recover within given time frame might be impaired due to fatigue. But don't take my word for it. So it's beyond this webinar to go into all the nuances of training prescriptions, such as exercise selection, progressions, unload, and so forth. But it is important to know that there is no magic method all should follow. Some athletes can react positively to one type of prescription and negatively or neutrally, or actually not react to another. It is up to us coaches to measure and reevaluate. Unfortunately, due to the logistics of working with the group, one cannot provide fully individualized training to a given athlete. So when it comes to retest and repeat, one doesn't necessarily need to perform the 1RM test at each end of phase or program. Jim Wendler in 531 used simple increase in 1RM in everything, if everything went fine during the cycle and all sets and reps are being hit without too much of strain or exertion. A general rule is 2.5 to 5 kilograms for lower body lifts and 1.25 to 2.5 kilograms for the upper body lifts. So it's important to slow cook and not to increase 1RMs too abruptly just because you can lift more. So there's a difference between developing and expressing strength. Another method involves prescribing open sets. These are prescribed during the cycle to evaluate progression. The simplest method might involve trying to do as much quality reps in the last set over what is being prescribed. This represents short or basically mini testing. It's also important not to get too emotionally ramped up, since this can cause undue fatigue. There is much more leeway for the upper body in this method than with lower body, which can leave one tired and drained. To further avoid errors with training prescription, one needs to familiarize with the following table. I like to call it load exertion table, and it is very helpful in planning the training. Basically, the tables depict the same information but organized differently for easier and quicker finding. Assuming that the exertion is expressed as reps left in the tank, where maximum exertion is when there is zero reps left in the tank, and that's in this case it's a repetition maximum testing. And sub-maximum is when we have one or more reps left. Knowing individual exercises, specific 1RM table. So if you know the Dan Baker table we showed before, you can easily create this table yourself. The usefulness of this table is that it's provide a practical tool for progressions and evaluations of other programs. I can see a lot of coaches, and not a lot, but some coaches write like 5 sets of 5 with 85%, where according to this repetition maximum table, one can do 5 reps with 86%, with actually maximum exertion. So how on earth can one repeat those 5 sets and still be able to train his sport afterward? Hence, one needs to use this table to take multiple sets into account and also exertion levels, which might be the biggest cause of undue fatigue, especially with team sport athletes. In this five sets of 5 example, one should leave 2 or 3 reps in the tank. So instead of 85%, one should use 79 to 81%. Another option, first fully organized in a doable and practical way by Mike Tuscherer, is to use RPE scores, or rate of perceived exertion. So RPE scores are nothing more than a way to quantify the exertion level. In the case of RPE, 10 represent 0 reps left in the tank, 9 represent 1 rep left in the tank, 8 is 2 or 3 reps left in the tank, and so forth. So Mike Tuscherer developed a full powerlifting system using RPE, and it's actually beyond the scope of this webinar to review it. But long story short, Mike uses RPE to prescribe training instead of percentages. Although these are used, also the percentages are used as guidelines. So one can prescribe sets and reps using RPE, and athletes select the weight. It is important to notice here that one cannot prescribe 5 sets of 5 at 0.9 RPE unless one adjusts the weight used. These rules are beyond the scope of this webinar, and listeners are directed to very great work by Mike Tuscherer. So instead of prescribing reps, one can prescribe weight that one should use and RPE that needs to be hit with reps. So one set, one can do 5 reps at 8, and another set it could be 4 reps. So basically, RPE represents quality control. To use it reliably in practice, athletes have to be familiar with it, responsible and honest about their RPE. In team sports, we might not have this pleasure actually. So one can also use, instead of RPE, one can use qualitative terms like max exertion, near maximum exertion, and so forth, instead of 8 or 9 RPE. This can be done this is preferred to be done with assistant exercises. Here is one example of full body workout using principles explained. Here we have a pre-training warm-up that athletes can do on their own before joining the team. We have a training warm-up consisting of some dynamic warm-ups and specific warm-up with the barbell, or it could be either barbell complex or kettlebell complex or dumbbell complex or bodyweight complex or whatever. Then we have 3 parts. We also imposed time blocks, or time limits within these needs to be finished. So part A has 18 minutes to complete, and it's basically we are doing Olympic lifting in this part. So we have 3 exercises done back to back, so you can do one set of a block snatch, go away and do a hip flexor stretch, and also upper body, just do some mobility for the upper body, maybe using a broomstick, and do javelin complexes. So you also kind of implement those within the sets of snatch. And these doesn't necessarily need to be done after every set. They could be just done during the first couple of sets until you warm up your shoulders and hips. So in the case of Olympic lifts, I don't like prescribing exact percentages. I also don't like to perform sets across, which actually means that you use same weight and same reps across multiple sets. So in the case of Olympic lifting, I like to prescribe ramping up. So basically increase the weight until you hit certain weight that's heavy enough for a given training, and then you can, if you have time, or you can actually wave down. So wave down. So you decrease the load and ramp up again. So there's multiple ways to prescribe training, and different coaches use different methods, and some athletes prefer different ways to load. Part B, in this case 12 minutes to complete. We have bench press, where we have 3 working sets that progressively increase in intensity, but in this case we prescribe repetition zones. So if you had a game and you still have some lagging fatigue, you might lean on a safer side and perform less reps. And if you're feeling very good on a given day, you can go and do more reps. And we can also do a open set if this is maybe third week of the cycle, and we can do let's say a five reps and plus. So on the last set, where we use 83%, instead of doing 4 to 6, we try to do as much as possible, as long as we are technically proficient. So this is just an example. So we have a push and pull, doing inverted row on the rings. You can put plates on your belly or hang a kettlebell. And we are looking for 6 to 8 quality reps at medium exertion. So that's basically having 5 reps left in the tank. So this is a instruction for the players not to go to the failure. Now we have some core exercise, in this case side bridge, where we hold a bridge with a 20 kilo plate on the hip for 20 to 30 seconds on left and right. And we have a hip single leg bridge. In this case, this is also isometric. So you're basically lying on the ground on your back. You lift one leg on the bench, and you lift yourself to be a straight line and hold for 6 seconds and repeat 5 times on each leg. So it's actually great isometrical exercise for the hamstring. Because we are doing back squats in a part C, you don't want to kill your legs in a part B, right? We have some programs that prescribe, in this case, this is a full body session. We have some programs that prescribe back squat in a part A and B, or A or B, or just doing a very heavy compound exercises early in the training. That's basically a general rule, but if you actually do a heavy set of squats early in the practice, you're quite dead to do anything else qualitatively. So in this case, we save heavy lower body exercises at the end of the practice, but we also make sure we don't kill the legs or lower back in part B, so we are unable to do quality squats in a part C. So now you're doing a back squats with 2 seconds hold at the bottom, 75, 77, 80% for 3 to 5 reps. There's a difference between upper body and lower body, as probably you've noticed, especially when you do multiple sets. So we need to adjust 1RM table. I provided one way to adjust, and it uses actually a body weight, because when you do a bench, you're not lifting your body weight, and when you're doing a lower body lifts, you're actually lifting around 80-90% of your body weight. So that could cause percentages to a bit shift down, especially when you do multiple sets for the lower body. Then we have again core exercise, in this case rotational one, isometrical pull-off press, and we do some shoulder external rotation. So hopefully this gave you some ideas you can implement. There is recently a big interest in velocity-based training that uses, or VBT, that uses velocity of the barbell instead of percentage of 1 RM to prescribe training. It's a very promising approach since it allows for a natural progression of training, prescription, and it also takes into account day-to-day variability and avoids the need for explicit testing. Unfortunately, we don't have much time to review it here, and I direct all interested listeners to my blog, complementarytraining.net, for more information. Hope you have enjoyed this webinar. For any questions, please email me at complementarytraining@gmail.com, and I will be happy to answer them. Thank you very much for your attention.